Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. How do you interpret India's presence alongside Russia, China, Iran, and others at the recent summit in China? What does this tell us about the mindset of these major powers?
It's very interesting, because it always goes back to the question about what is Trump actually doing, because the United States, or we should say the Western Empire, has been courting India for the last 30 years, more or less. They've been trying to get them on their side. And then, in the last few years, they formed this Quad. Remember the Quad? United States, Australia, Japan, and India. And this was supposed to be a big counterweight to China. And so it would seem that Trump is quite out of his mind.
Did they consider Pakistan as well, or Pakistan wasn't that much?
I don't think that Pakistan was in the Quad. I think it was just India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, if I'm not mistaken. And so now Trump pretty much flushed this whole thing down the toilet, and he pushed India into the arms of China. So that would seem counterproductive, unless you consider that maybe Trump has a different agenda in mind, because we tend to treat countries as monoliths, and so United States is doing this, United States is doing that, and so, but it's not really the United States. It's the people in power, and I think that pretty much for the last several decades, and I've started to become aware of this with, let's say, George Bush Sr. Well, even Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan had his, the person who was pretty much in charge of foreign policy was William Casey, the head of the CIA, who was a Rhodes Scholar, I think. He was one of these people with very deep liaisons to London. And then you had George Bush Sr., who again was somehow in a strange way on the hook to the City of London, old banking family. And then you had Bill Clinton, another Oxford Rhodes Scholar. And then you had Barack Obama, who was, then another Bush Jr., then Barack Obama, who his political mentor was Tony Blair, none other than the knight of the British Empire, and then you had Joe Biden, who didn't even know where he was, right? So there was some shadow government in place in Washington, and so that's what we got used to calling the United States. And it's true that there was certain predictability to the U.S. policy under these administrations, and it was very consistent. And it was always pro-war, pro-empire, pro always treating other countries in a kind of thuggish way. You do as we say, or else. And I think that there's a real change now in the White House with Donald Trump. So Trump does continue with a thuggish style of management, but I think that the substance is changing. And I've seen how the media is interpreting this whole thing between Trump and Modi. And then there were some reports about how Trump tried to call Modi, and Modi is refusing his phone calls, and he's hanging up on him, and all this. Maybe this is true, but maybe it's not true. I don't know. We're in a blizzard of psyops. We have to be careful what we believe or what we don't. But there was no criticism of Trump or the U.S. administration in Beijing by any of the participants. So this wasn't an anti-American gathering. And then there was a meeting between Robert Fico and Vladimir Putin in Beijing, which was very interesting because it was publicized, but it was publicized very widely because of the Fico's criticism of the policies of the European Union, and then the exchange he and Vladimir Putin had on that account. But one thing that kind of went under the radar is that Robert Fico mentioned that the United States, the Westinghouse Corporation, is building a nuclear power plant in Slovakia. And Robert Fico said, it would be very interesting for us if the Russians engineer and Russian companies cooperated on this project with the Westinghouse and with Slovakia on this nuclear power plant. And Vladimir Putin said, yes, we would be very interested in that kind of cooperation. And in fact, we have offered similar cooperation to the American side. Maybe he mentioned Westinghouse by name, I'm not sure. We have suggested similar cooperation with the American side on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, right? And Putin said that we have already been in discussions on this subject with the American side. So I think there's no, I think that order of the day number one is to change the security architecture of the world, and to, for the United States to extricate itself from its imperial engagements, where, it's basically the world's hegemon and the policeman of the world on behalf of the imperial cabal. And then the United States having to emerge as just one of the major powers in the world and embrace the multipolar integrations, which has been explicitly the foreign policy objective of the Trump administration. Unless you believe they're lying about that, but I don't see why they would be lying about that. And so if that's the case, then, the United States needs to recover its position as an industrial power in the world. If you're going to trade with the rest of the world, you have to produce something. It can't just be oil and gas and soybeans. You don't want to be a Bantustan, right? You don't want to be like the commodities exporting country. And in order for the United States to re-energize, re-empower its industries, it needs to create a protected market. It needs to introduce tariffs for that reason, which is what Trump has been doing and what has forever been his objective. He's pretty much announced that this is what I want to do. So I think that his imposition of tariffs on on India, isn't a punishment to India for trading with Russia. That's just the language that Trump has to use for domestic consumption, for domestic politics, because we have to always remember Trump is the president of the United States, but a lot of the power in the United States resides in Congress. Power of the purse, most importantly. And in Congress, Trump has very slim majority. And so he has to be very careful how he treads. And a lot of people who are in Congress are still very deeply entrenched with the Cold War mindset, where, Russia is the enemy, India is not, but China is the enemy. We have to confront them. We have to show them how tough we are. And so he has to talk that language. So if he wants to introduce tariffs, which is an attack on the British system of free trade, he would get a pushback. But if he wraps it in, we're going to be punishing Russia and we're going to show the Chinese how tough we are, then, all the clapping seals in Congress, they go, yay, look how tough we are. And so I think that this is the reason why Trump appears to be blundering in this situation. But the the exchange I just named between Robert Fico and Vladimir Putin confirms something that we've been talking about for months now, Nima, and that is that the discussions and the cooperation between the United States, the Trump administration and the Vladimir Putin's government is far more extensive than we know. That a lot of these discussions and talks are secret. They are not being disclosed, which is probably part of the reason why, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, Tulsi Gabbard said no more sharing of intelligence with Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand about our discussions with the Russians. And so if this is the case, that confirms that Trump is serious about embracing the multipolar integrations. And if you're embracing the multipolar integrations, that it doesn't make any sense to antagonize Russia, China, and India, because this is the core of the multipolar integrations process. So I think that Trump is just doing his usual in the public relations sphere, predominantly for domestic consumption, and that the real deal is going on behind the scenes, under the radar, that his administration is having extensive talks about with the Russians, with the Chinese, probably with the Indians as well. Somebody will have explained this to them and to say, like, look, nothing personal. We have to change our policies. This is how it's going to be. Pay no attention to, our press releases, to our press conferences, to all the, trash talk. We are, we're on board. We're with you. And, Trump got the opportunity to say something antagonistic towards the Chinese and towards the whole parade in China 2 days ago, on Tuesday, in the Oval Office press conference, where, some journalists said, like, oh, aren't you worried about this big show of force that the Chinese, made? And he says, like, no, absolutely not. I have a great relationship with Xi Jinping, and the Chinese need us. And then, of course, Trump can't help being Trump, so he had to say that the Chinese need us more than we need them, and that the whole reason why they threw this military parade is because they were hoping that I would watch. That's Trump being Trump, unfortunately. But I think that the actual real substance of what is going on behind the scenes are, I would say, good news and positive developments.
China's Victory Day parade showcased strength, independence, and a call for peace over confrontation. Xi's speech rejected bullying, while Trump reacted with mixed praise and frustration over the U.S. not being acknowledged. What deeper message is China sending, and what pressures is Trump facing at home as global power shifts?
Until Trump took over at the White House, the preparations for war against China were full on. This was not even like, if we can't avoid a war against China, then, we have to be prepared. No, they were preparing for war against China. That was the whole purpose of the Quad. We had on record statements by American military personnel in Taiwan who were telling that we're preparing the theater for war exactly as we did in Ukraine. So I think that the attitude and the mindset of hostility towards China is still prevalent in the American political class. I think that this war was being planned not because anybody even had any, delusions that they could win. But empires don't fight wars because they think they will win. They fight wars to keep them going, because it maintains a certain cohesion of the society at home. There's big bad external enemy that needs to be fought, and then you can explain all the problems of society, the decaying infrastructure, the decaying healthcare standards of living, economic crisis, inflation. All of this you can then blame on China. So that's why you need that war. And so I think that there are very powerful vested interests in the United States that still desperately want that war. And so now for Trump to steer the course away from war and towards a completely new kind of foreign policy is delicate and it's complicated. And I think that he has to steer that course very, very carefully. And again, people have to keep in mind that the most important fight that Trump is fighting is actually on the domestic front. Because right now, he has the majority in the Senate, majority in the House, and the White House. Fine. But that majority is very slim, and it could slip away very easily. And so not only that, but among the so we're talking about a Republican majority, but not all the Republicans are loyal to Trump, and many of them are actually disloyal to Trump. They'll stab him in the back if they get a chance to. And so this is, I think that people have exaggerated expectations. They think that Trump becomes president, he gets elected, he walks into the White House, and then he snaps his fingers and everything gets rearranged the way he wants it to. It doesn't work that way. People have, we've all seen how, U.S., most of U.S. Congress is owned by AIPAC. Congressman Massey has explained how practically everybody, but except him and maybe another person, have an AIPAC minder. They call them multiple times a day to make sure how they vote, how they're informed, what their priorities are. We've seen that a lot of congressmen in front of their offices, they have Israeli flags, and it says, "I support Israel, I stand with Israel," things like this. So, these are the realities that predate Trump's administration. This is a system that has been set up and reinforced and entrenched for decades now. It's not a simple matter to change it just like that. And so, I see a lot of Trump's stunts as maybe ways of navigating this complicated minefield. And I don't know why Trump has to adopt this thuggish, vulgar way of communicating, but he's been in the media, he's been in the show business. Maybe that works in the American culture. Maybe being a Taoist sage and speaking in complex abstract concepts doesn't work as well. I don't know. It's annoying, it's irritating, it's painful and embarrassing to watch. But so far, I have to say that if you compare where we are today and where we were 7 months ago, I think that the world is in a much, much better shape. I think that the risk of World War III is much, much lower. And I also think that the risk of the United States starting the war against China is also much, much lower. And I think maybe part of that is ejecting India from the Quad into the arms of China, basically dissipating that hostility, that whole setup rigged for the future war. Now, I don't know if that was a deliberate policy on Trump's part, but that's the effect of it. And I think that's good news for everybody else.
China's parade wasn't a threat. It was a message. We stand strong and independent. India joining China and Russia shows multipolarity is real. The U.S. is losing grip, and Trump may be the only one trying to shift course, balancing between elites and the people. The real deals aren't made on stage. They happen behind closed doors. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.